The queen, desperate for eternal youth, would immerse herself every day in a pool filled with milk. Once every inch of her skin had absorbed the precious essence, she could instantly appear 10 years younger, but the effects of the milk bath were short-lived. That was why her brother, Finn, would always capture a beautiful young girl. The queen would grip the girl's neck, then open her mouth wide. A surge of life force would be drawn from the girl's body. The girl would wither in age at an astonishing speed, until every last drop of vitality was drained away. And in that very moment, the queen's once withered face would turn soft, radiant, and breathtakingly beautiful. Not long ago, this stunning queen had been nothing more than a prisoner of war. King Magnus had been so utterly bewitched by her beauty that he brought her back to the palace and made her his queen. But the king never imagined that behind such beauty lay a heart steeped in malice. On their wedding night, the queen drove a blade straight into the king's chest. Then she flung open the castle gates, allowing her army of black armored soldiers to pour inside. Through her meticulously crafted plan, the queen seized control of the royal palace. She ordered all captured soldiers to be executed on the spot, all except the young Snow White, who was condemned to a lifetime in the dungeon. But the queen's ambition knew no bounds. She desired not only supreme power, but also to remain the most beautiful woman in the land. Anxiously, she turned to her magic mirror, demanding to know who was the fairest of them all. From the mirror, golden liquid began to flow, gradually shaping itself into the form of a human figure. From the mirror's mouth, the queen heard the answer she wanted. More than 10 years slipped by. Snow White, still locked away in the dungeon, had now grown into a young woman. She had been waiting for her chance to break free and avenge her father's death. One day, the queen asked her mirror the same question again, but this time, the answer was one she did not wish to hear. For the girl who had grown up inside the dungeon, Snow White would surpass her beauty and become the fairest woman in the entire land. The mirror, however, offered a solution. If the queen could claim Snow White's heart, she would retain her youth forever. The queen wasted no time. She ordered her brother Finn to go to the dungeon and cut out Snow White's heart. But the moment he saw Snow White's beauty, a dark desire took root in his mind. Snow White seized the moment. Slashing Finn's face with a swift strike, she dashed out of the cell, but soon found herself surrounded by the queen's soldiers. In the heat of danger, Snow White dove headfirst into the sewers. Fortune favored her, for the sewers emptied into the open sea. She leapt into the water and escaped the castle at last. Just then, two magpies appeared in the sky, as if guiding her way. Snow White followed them, only to find a jet-black white horse waiting for her. Without a second thought, she climbed onto the horse's back and galloped away. But the queen's soldiers were already closing in. With no time to choose her path, Snow White plunged into the dark forest. There, the horse stumbled and fell into a swamp. Hearing the soldiers approaching fast from behind, Snow White abandoned the horse and slipped deeper into the forest's shadows. The swamp blocked the pursuing riders, forcing them to halt in frustration. But this dark forest, steeped in the stench of death, was a forbidden zone for mankind. The moment Snow White stepped inside, countless monstrous creatures closed in on her, as if eager to drain every drop of blood and flesh from her body. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she finally collapsed to the ground and lost consciousness. When the queen learned that Snow White had fled into the dark forest, she flew into a rage, for her sorcery held no power within those cursed woods. She ordered Finn to find the one man who had ever dared to enter the dark forest, the Huntsman. The queen promised him a generous bounty in exchange for capturing Snow White. But years ago, when the Huntsman had ventured into the forest with his wife, she had met a tragic death inside. Bitter from that loss, he refused the queen's offer without hesitation. The queen then promised something far greater. She would use her magic to resurrect his wife. Though the Huntsman did not truly believe she possessed the power to restore the dead, the chance to see his wife again was enough. In the end, he agreed to the deal. Using his tracking skills, the Huntsman quickly picked up Snow White's trail. At last, he found her hiding beneath the roots of a massive tree. Finn moved in to take Snow White away, but the Huntsman demanded the queen keep her word and bring his wife back to life first. That was when he realized the queen's promise had been nothing more than a cruel trick. She could never raise the dead. Enraged by the deception, the Huntsman swung his axe with ferocious force. In his fury, he fought like a man possessed, quickly cutting down every soldier in their path. Then he led Snow White toward the edge of the forest, but along the way, they encountered the most fearsome creature the woods had to offer. Snow White looked down in terror, only to see thick vines twisting and writhing into living black serpents. The venomous creatures hissed, lunging toward her with bared fangs. Fortunately, the huntsman struck in time, severing the vines with a single blow of his axe, and saving her from certain death. He warned Snow White to keep her heart strong, for if she let fear consume her, the dark forces would invade her mind and plunge her into deadly hallucinations. He then handed her a weapon, so she could defend herself, step by careful step. The two finally reached the edge of the forest, but the huntsman suddenly grew wary. The ground was littered with bleached white bones, a grim sign that any human passing through here had likely been attacked by some unknown beast. Yet this mysterious predator, drawn by Snow White's beauty, shrank back in bashfulness and slipped away into the forest's shadows. Weary and worn, the pair finally emerged from the dark forest, but at that very moment, they fell into an ambush laid by 7 dwarves. When Snow White revealed her true identity, the dwarves were taken aback, for they were once loyal subjects of King Magnus. In his lifetime, King Magnus had been a ruler loved and admired by all, and because of their respect for him, the dwarves chose not to harm the 2 travelers. The dwarves then led them to their home. It was like a hidden paradise, a place untouched by the outside world. Everywhere they looked, there were wondrous animals and rare plants, and the entire forest radiated a calm, peaceful aura. The 2 magpies that had appeared before fluttered down in front of Snow White once again. From inside their feathery bodies, 2 tiny fairies emerged. Charmed by Snow White's beauty, the fairies blinked their large, sparkling eyes and smiled. Then they waved for her to follow. Snow White trailed behind them until they reached the deepest heart of the forest. There, beneath an ancient tree, stood a white stag of extraordinary grace and spirit. The stag seemed to have anticipated Snow White's arrival, and as if hearing its silent call, Snow White slowly stepped forward. She extended her pale, delicate hand and gently stroked the stag's soft fur. To her surprise, the stag bowed deeply before her. The dwarves instantly understood. This was a blessing. It meant Snow White was destined to save the entire land from the darkness that plagued it. But in that perfect, serene moment, a cold arrow suddenly pierced the stag. The shock sent every animal in the forest fleeing in terror. Finn had tracked them down with a band of hunters. The stag dissolved into a flurry of white butterflies that scattered into the air. The huntsman stepped in to block Finn's path, buying Snow White precious time to escape. But Finn returned with newfound strength, and even the huntsman, fighting with all his might, was no match for him. In a desperate move, the huntsman spotted the sharp spikes behind Finn and slammed him into them with all his strength. Far away in the palace, the queen suddenly collapsed as if struck herself. Her magic, bound to Finn, had been violently broken and turned against her. Elsewhere, a hunter was closing in on Snow White, but she seized his arm and yanked him from his horse. Only then did she realize it was her childhood friend William. He had disguised himself among the hunters to find her and bring her to safety. His mission was clear: to have her lead an uprising against the wicked queen. Meanwhile, the queen also sensed the growing threat. She began to weave her magic, blanketing the forest in heavy, swirling snow. William reached Snow White's side and confessed how deeply he had missed her. Moved by his earnest gaze and handsome face, Snow White quickly found herself swept away by emotion. William took out an apple, offering it as a token of his love. Snow White accepted it and bit into it without hesitation. The pain was immediate and excruciating. The apple in her hand withered into a black, rotting husk, and before her eyes, William's appearance melted away. It had never been William, it was the evil queen herself. She had taken his form to trick Snow White into giving up her heart, so she could gain eternal youth. As the queen prepared to cut the heart from her chest, The real William and the Huntsman arrived just in time. The Huntsman swung his axe down at her with all his strength, but the cunning queen shattered into a cloud of black ravens and vanished into the sky. Unfortunately, the poisoned Snow White had already closed her eyes. The group carried her lifeless body back to the refuge. The Huntsman gazed at Snow White, and in that moment, she reminded him of his late wife. It was his own recklessness back then that had doomed her to fall victim to dark magic. And now, once again, he had failed to protect someone when it mattered most. His heart was heavy with regret and sorrow. Carrying all that pain, the Huntsman leaned down and kissed Snow White gently, a final farewell. But to his astonishment, his true love's kiss shattered the curse. Snow White stirred, her eyes fluttering open in a miraculous awakening. Her return to life reignited everyone's will to fight. The crowd roared their vow to follow Snow White and overthrow the wicked queen's rule. Meanwhile, the queen had prepared herself for war. She had absorbed the life force of dozens of young maidens, restoring her power to its absolute peak. Soon, Snow White led a mighty army, charging toward the castle. Massive fireballs rained down from the sky, engulfing the battlefield. Before the army could even reach the gates, they had already suffered heavy losses. Fortunately, the dwarves, who had slipped into the castle beforehand, managed to open the gates from within. The soldiers surged inside, clashing with the enemy in brutal close combat. From high above, the Queen and Snow White locked eyes. The time had come to settle their score once and for all. Snow White cut down her foes and forced her way into the palace, but the Queen stood there, calm and unshaken. She had been waiting, planning to trap everyone inside and destroy them all at once. Closing her eyes, the Queen began to weave her dark magic. Countless razor-sharp black shards descended from above, then merged together into terrifying creatures that roared and lunged at the soldiers. Snow White raised her sword, determined to avenge her father, but the difference in their strength was staggering. The cruel queen wanted Snow White to watch, as everyone died because of her. She showed off her power, demonstrating that even when engulfed in flames, her body would heal instantly. The queen strode forward, ready to strike the killing blow, but Snow White lifted her arm, blocking the fatal attack, and in the same motion, she drove her blade straight into the queen's heart. The black creatures dissolved into nothing. The queen, stunned, could not believe she had fallen to Snow White. Before their eyes, her body withered at a rapid, unnatural pace, until all life left her completely. After enduring countless trials, Snow White had finally shattered the queen's dark reign. At last, sunlight returned to the land, banishing the shadows, and Snow White became the new ruler of the kingdom.